Welcome back to Pale Cachexia. Now the question of the day is, do you think that Esther will find a cure eventually in order to cure her cachexia, or do you think that this will be an eternally dark fantasy scenario where the protagonist will only and ever consumed by this horrible disease? With an irritated click of his tongue, he threw his fine quill onto the desk. The father again. Why am I wasting my time with such foolery? I don't know why. It's impossible. The root must lie in an imbalance of the humours, of the body's chemistry. How can this fanciful nonsense possibly be of any use to me? I wonder why. Probably because the cachexia itself could be of a supernatural tie. Desperation truly does drive every man to the metaphysical. Muttering to himself in exasperation, Isaiah rubbed a hand over his blurry eye. It felt as if he was constantly throwing himself at an impossible task, wasting his time on a labour that would never bear any fruit. A disease that was better off simply managed instead of ever truly cured. That was what all the literature pointed to, and he was nearly at the point of believing it. But somehow a little spark of hope always remained within him. There's always that little bit of spark in each and every one of us that wants to believe in something else, something that tells us that we can strive for the impossible, because in our eyes it's only improbable. And as Isaiah leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifted over to the open window. I was looking over there thinking, open window? Oh dear, he could see Selina's small shape in the distance flower patch, running to and fro as she entertained herself with her usual games of make-believe. She was growing so fast, a little bean sprout determines to reach the sky. He'd have to tailor some new clothes for her before winter, just as well, since he'd improved his sewing skills a great deal. It pleased him to sit and watch her at play. Such leisure was well deserved, since she'd performed excellently in her lessons today. Her intelligence at such a young age was certainly remarkable, though not wholly unexpected, since he had fathered her after all. Still, he found it difficult not to feel begrudgingly proud of the girl. She was already a voracious reader of the academic books he supplied her with, and although he had technically forbidden her from reading any of his grittier tomes of fiction, he pretended not to notice when they occasionally went missing. To his own surprise, Selina's cleverness had motivated him to take up writing again. In less than a year, he compiled a highly detailed almanac for her, penned in a straighter style than his normal academic ramblings. Perhaps he would make several more, since he was still learning the way of a forester's life himself. It was very important to him that she learned to flourish alone, without relying on any urban comforts that would surely weaken her will. He wanted to impart as much of his knowledge to her as possible, in the hopes that absorbing it at an early age will help her always remain independent. As difficult as it would be for him to leave this world, knowing so much of his work was still unfinished, as long as Selina knew how to survive without him, when that fateful day arrived, he'd finally be able to let go. That fateful day. The fateful day that he would one day depart from this world, unfortunately. For Selina, that is. A tightening, squeezing sensation in his chest jerked Isaiah back from his thoughts. Pushing back his chair, he rose swiftly to his feet. And doing this swiftly is not a great idea. Slumping against his desk, Isaiah barely managed to catch himself in time. The muscles and tendons in his legs as if they'd atrophied, or else were impossibly strained beyond the point of exhaustion. Damn it, Cachexia, where is it? He reached out with a trembling hand, grasping around for the presence of a small cold bottle. Soon his fingers brushed against it, yanking the flask towards him. His medicine, the last dose, hadn't been strong enough. Ouch. and placed the uncorked bottle to his lips. He threw back the foul-tasting liquid. It stung the back of his throat, the sharpness of alcohol burning a path down to his stomach, and I felt the burning inside the stomach itself. But soon as the tonic filtered through his system, he felt a modicum of strength return to his lower body. Despite the powerful ache, at least he could move. For now. Sometimes a little bit of the sentence there makes up for the entirety of the sentence. For now, that is. Picking up a roughly hewn cane that leaned against his desk, Isaiah slowly crossed his study. But before he reached his distastefully familiar bears, he paused, casting a sudden swift glance towards the window. She was still there, dancing, gathering flowers, waiting for him to finally step out and join her. Disappointed, no doubt, when another bedridden day came and went. Playing alone as best she could, never complaining, never crying, not once. As if she were immune to every crippling pain of sadness. And I think that's what being in your childhood days is. You're free from adulthood corruption, which could also be political. Lowering himself onto his bed, he exhaled a long, weary sigh. This bitter frustration felt impossible to cling to for much longer. With each passing year, the strength of his will seemed to weaken further and further. Every burst of indignation and determined pride was always matched by the depressive slump of the aftermath. No, he wouldn't give up. He couldn't give up. Not yet. But how much longer was this cycle sustainable? Cycle? Time shifts? How much longer before his body and mind gave out altogether? There had to be an end, and yet all he could do was attempt to stave it off for as long as possible. Cycle, you say? Now that's very interesting. Why would the word cycle be in there? As in, this is going to be a theme that loops around and begins again. Selina. Poor, unlucky child. Mumbling to himself in a daze of exhaustion, he pressed his cheek against the pillow, staring into the wall with half-lidded eyes. A problem to which there was no solution. No exit other than to wait for sleep to come and relieve the burden for the rest of the day. Perhaps he would awaken with a little more energy, a little more inspiration, a little more hope. Or else it would all remain the same, until the cycle started over once more. Unless you're thinking cycle isn't like a day-to-day cycle with the Cachexia always coming into play. But it could also be the bigger spectrum of cycle, as in the different events that transpires until the cycle starts over once more. Now we're back to the present day. Cool, crisp droplets coursed down Esther's cheeks. The light breeze gently brushed past her face, turning the streaks of water into refreshingly cold trails that made her skin tingle. And she shivered contentedly, swaying her feet in the water. Such a lovely morning. She couldn't remember ever seeing one like this in the city, or anywhere else in her long travels. The stream's light bubbling, the bright sound of birds, the sunlight delicately reaching through the trees. It was hard not to feel like everything was right in the world. Ah, I found it! I found it, Esther, look! You found what? Selina. What have you found? Turning ahead, Esther spotted a small figure running up alongside the stream. In one triumphantly raised hand, she clutched a long ribbon that fluttered in the air behind her. They're both in some sort of nightgown wear. Phew, I can't believe we got so far down the stream. Selina finally came to a stop beside Esther, still holding up a ribbon as she panted slightly. You look like a fisherwoman showing off her prize catch. Wow. Do I? Do you now? Oh, Esther, look, it's alive. I'm alive. I think it's trying to hop back into the stream, as the wind made her ribbon flutter and ripple. Selina gasped, holding on with both hands like it was about to pull her into the water. Oh no, here, I'll help you. Dare you do such a thing to a fish? She rose to her feet, stepping over to grasp part of a ribbon. As if in response, the wind grew even livelier, making the thin strip of cloth dance frantically. Oh no. Careful, this one is really strong. Don't let go, Esther. I'm counting on you. I won't, don't worry. I've been training my life for this. Yeah, in every heroic moment we say, okay, we've got this. We've prepared for this very moment. I have played hours, days, nights, all week for this very moment. And then it comes to a grinding halt and nothing really happens. All that train really did pay off for something, didn't it? The next moment we both broke into a quiet fit of giggling, unable to stay serious any longer. It had been a few weeks now since Esther had first arrived at the manor, so we definitely have gone forward in time because we've only had like 2-3 days. So the first day was we explored around the gardens and stuff like that in the Mausoleum. On the second day we were stuck inside because of the rain, and now this technically should be the third day, but now we skip forward in time. What happened in the past days, I imagine? Or it could even be the fact that the second day wasn't even the second day, but like the fourth day or something. The days seemed to fly by so quickly that she could barely keep track. Between working and playing together with Selina, every hour always felt well spent, without a single gap of boredom to seep into. Since she'd gotten so caught up in their new routine, however, Esther hadn't spent nearly as much time researching as she needed to. In fact, the only thing she'd done was skim over a few shelves of incomprehensible writings she found often left her disheartened. And after finishing her daily chores with Selina, she usually felt too tired to spend much time researching. But it was a pleasant tiredness, not the fatigue of those long, bedridden days she'd often had before. It was fatigue from actual work rather than fatigue from the disease. Earlier that morning, after they'd had their morning tea together, Selina had told her of the day's plans. First, they'd wash their clothes, then gather some flowers and herbs outside the manor grounds before heading off to the cemetery. It felt strange at first to wear her nightgown into the forest, but Esther soon forgot about it. She was looking forward to having fresh, clean clothes again, and the stream's clear waters easily carried away all the dirt. Of course, they carried away one of Selina's ribbons too, but luckily it now lay clasped between their fingers again. So that's what it was a ribbon, not a fish, because you would think that something wiggling about in your hands would be a fish if you catched it from the waters. After they changed back into their dry clothes, the two girls set off towards the flower patch with their baskets. Slowly but surely, Esther had started growing more at ease in the deep forest. She no longer felt haunted by the anxious, weary feeling from when she first journeyed here, and the woods had seemed so daunting and unknowable. Of course she didn't understand them half as well as Selina, and a part of her doubted that she ever would. But at least the towering trees no longer felt quite as lonely in their vastness, no longer feeling overwhelmed by the sheer height of the canopies of the trees themselves. Soon they reached the flower patch, its many blooms glimmering between the sun's radiance. It felt so warm and pleasant that Esther felt a strong desire to simply bask in it all. What is this contemplative look for then? Unable to resist the urge, she lowered herself down, sprawling out amidst the flowers like a contented cat. What is this, Al? Good idea! Selina lied down beside her, mimicking Esther's relaxed stretch. And we look up to the morning sun. The gentle breeze lightly brushed over them, ruffling their freshly cleaned clothes and hair. It felt as divinely peaceful as any place could possibly hope to be, a dimension that lay beyond all earthly worries and duties. For a long, etheric moment, it seemed like every ounce of weight had lifted from Esther's body, as she was nothing more than a fragment of sunlight in the sky. I don't really get that, but okay. Esther? After a few minutes, or perhaps many, Selina's voice drifted out of the unhurried silence. I was wondering, could you tell me more about the city? What your life is like there, I mean? The question caught Esther off guard. It pulled her back from her airy, dreamlike thoughts, tethering her to reality again. Unfortunately, since she'd started living with Selina, most of her conversations had been light and topical. I was about to say tropical there. And if anything, Selina had actually avoided asking about the city. But once her initial surprise had faded, she found a reply racing to her mind with unusual ease. Perhaps a part of her wanted to share more of her life with Selina. As a friend. As a newfound friend. And the city is static, efficient and industrial, but always the same. Yeah, everywhere you go just looks the same. Academics and engineers say they're making advances every year, but in the end, life never really seems to change. Especially for one who has gotten the same bedridden disease for all these years. It felt so strange to look back on the home now. Here, deep within the forest, those cold steel towers seemed like a distant fantasy, not something that even existed in the same world. And there are people from different classes, the wealthy, the poor, and the in-between. They have very different lives and different senses of what's normal. Indeed, that's great to say, actually. We all have different definitions of the word normal, and at the end of the day, there's no true definition of normal, because what is normal? But no matter how much money they have or don't have, everyone still suffers in their own ways. I think that's just a remark for everyone, really. Getting a new device to keep track of time or warm the house changes things on the surface, but in the end, it never really helps people with pain. It only gives it a new name and a different form. When Esther described the city like this to someone who'd never seen it, it sounded so bleak and hollow, because at times it is, a place no one would surely want to live in, if they could help it. I'd much rather be out in this forest, for goodness sakes, myself. Was that how she truly felt too? No matter how much technology we have, none of it can help with finding a cure for the Pale. We're as helpless against it as we were from the beginning. In order to understand what it is that we need to do to find the cure, we need to know about the background knowledge in order to understand where it is that we need to go. The only thing we can do is try and abate the symptoms. That is step 1. Step 2, when abating the symptoms, is finding a cure. Esther's voice gradually trailed off into a subdued murmur. The breeze drifted over them again, carrying away the last trace of her words, but not the weight of futile hope they left behind. Something about the beautiful, clear sky brought a deep melancholy to her heart. A carefree purity above all sickness and despair, all the more lively for how untouchable it was. The Pale. I'm sorry, I don't really understand it very well. After a long pause, Selina finally spoke up again, sounding unusually shy and hesitant, because she all knows too familiar about a person that was so close to her that suffered from the Pale, and most likely died from it as well. Papa told me it affects everyone differently. Some people don't show many signs at all, but others are always very sick. What is it like for you, Esther? I mean, only if it's alright to ask. Although Selina hastily reassured her, Esther realized she didn't want to stay silent like she normally did when asked such a question. She never truly explained the feeling before, but now the desire to share it with somebody almost overwhelmed her in its intensity. The Pale came to me around 4 years ago. A few months after I lost a tournament, one that was very important to me. A tournament, you say? What kind of tournament would that be? At first, when I started spending the days in bed from exhaustion, I thought I just had a common illness. But after the days of tiredness kept scratching on, and no doctor could find anything wrong with my body, I realized what it really was. For me, the Pale it's like a parasite. I can feel it inside me, drain my energy, stealing my mind away from things I want to do or focus on. There are good days and bad ones, but sometimes even speaking feels like it's impossible. The medicine helps, but it feels like it's gotten less and less effective since I've started taking it. Her fingers drifted to the small puncture spot beneath her sleeve, where the flesh had grown slightly discolored and permanently tender. Since she started injecting herself, Esther always wore long sleeves to hide the mark. So, hid the mark? Yeah, hide the mark. I don't know why I thought I didn't have an E in it, even when it grew warm outside. Back when I was studying at the academy, I struggled with Pale for my last 3 years. The teachers who had monitored me, the ones who'd always dotted on me, I saw them pull away when they realised I couldn't accomplish anything anymore. Even my friends there started separating from me, thinking I was somebody they'd only drag them down. My results slipped more and more, and by the time I finished, I'd lost any chance at becoming the researcher I dreamed of being. I didn't want to go back and study more, or start an apprenticeship or another trade that I only fail at. My parents kept telling me that I should settle for simple work or find someone who'd support me, but I hated both of those ideas. I wanted to make my own life. That's what I feel as well at times, but of course, life has it at you. I promised them I'd find a cure for myself within a year, or at least something that would help my symptoms more than the medicine did. But even though I searched far and wide and met many people and saw many kinds of advanced medicine, nothing worked for me. As she spoke, her mind flitted back to her many travels. The odd jobs she'd worked, the fascinating books she'd find in old libraries, the doctors and shaman who came from such varied walks of life, and how restless she felt now, looking back on those times. Every time I thought I found something, and I started latching onto hope for a cure, it always ended up as another empty promise. And now, the year I've given myself is almost over. I could keep searching, but I don't have the will to continue after so much failure. Finished the thought in her head, something she couldn't bring herself to say aloud. I need to go back home. I don't want to abandon my parents, and I can't keep wandering forever. I had my chance, and if I failed, then I have to move on. Esther did her very best to make her voice sound firm and resolute, but she couldn't keep a note of sorrow from sinking in at the end. No matter how hard she tried to tell herself otherwise, the prospect of returning home filled her with dread. So the rumour about Papa's research, that was your last hope? Yes. When Selina finally questioned her after a long pause, Esther bit her lower lip briefly. I don't want to go back to my parents empty-handed. I don't want to tell them I lost. The feeling of failure. A feeling of that they're going to be disappointed with you. A somber heavy silence weighed over them, out of place among the beautiful skies and singing birds. Esther felt guilty for sharing such dark thoughts with her friends, but at the same time, it lessened her burden a little when she voiced them, no matter how hopeless the situation was. She could tell Selina was truly listening to what she said, and her quiet sympathy brought Esther more relief than she expected. She can't empathize, but she can truly sympathize with what's going on. Esther, whether or not you find something in Papa's research, you haven't lost at all. Rising up into a seating position, Selina hugged her knees to her chest, gazing intently down at Esther. You fought so hard and travelled so much, and never stopped searching, even when it seemed hopeless. But the question is, do you think that the guilt would be more burdensome if you never tried than if you did try? I suppose it depends on the situation itself. Like, I would feel like the burden could be heavier if you didn't try than you did try, because if you didn't try, then you always be wondering if you could have found something within that utterly hopeless situation that would help you, rather than thinking, I did look into it, but I found nothing. So my road has ended here, so let's try and live with life with the cards I've been dealt with. Most people just give up with symptoms like yours. If the doctors can't discover a cure, how can anyone else ever hope to find one? And that is where the supernatural comes in. If something within the real world cannot find a cure, then something in the supernatural world, A, could possibly have given her the disease in the first place, and B, could also have the answers to a cure. Yet here you are, still looking everywhere you can, doing everything you possibly can do. Because you want to love your life, don't you? You'll never be happy just sitting around, struggling on for no reason. After her firm, gently chiding words, a smile started to soften Selina's features. She studied Esther with eyes that seemed far more perspective than most people Esther had met in the city or elsewhere. When I look at you, I get this feeling that, more than anything, you hate giving up. And even if there is no cure, and all you've really done really did end up being in vain, you can still prove everyone you doubted you was wrong. You can research, you can explore, you can work. Really, you can do anything you want, even if they try to tell you otherwise. It's just that you need a reason for it, one you can truly believe in. Don't you think so, Esther? Reaching out, she took Esther's hand in her own smaller ones, giving them a reassuring squeeze. Wow. Then, with a faint huff of exertion, Selina rose to her feet, pulling Esther up alongside her. Wow. You're a strong girl, Esther. Why? Someone who have to be blind if they can see that. Wow, for goodness sakes. That's why I know the Pale won't win against you in the end. Such a big belief there. Really. How could... Oh, I didn't mean to do that! I didn't mean to do that! Really, how could it? You're very stubborn about things. I mean, stubborn in a good way. So that's why I think you're a better chance of curing yourself than anybody. You'll find something. I know you will. But like I told you before, I'll help you any way I can, no matter what. I promise. Maybe it was the light, cheerfully confident way Selina was reassured, or perhaps Esther had just always wished that she could hear those words. Whatever the reason, it felt like she was speaking the truth. Unlike the empty optimism that so many people pass around, Selina always seemed to genuinely believe in what she was saying. Because not only is she saying them with words, she is saying them with emotion behind it. And emotion has a far bigger weight than the actual words themselves. It made it that much easier for Esther to believe her, too. At least in part, if not yet fully. You're too kind to me, Selina. Oh, that's a silly thing to say. How could anyone ever be too kind? And that is the absolute truth. There's no such thing as being too kind. They're suspiciously kind, but not too kind. Very easily. I don't think I believe you. Besides, not kindness, I'm just telling you the truth. That's all. If you say so. If you're saying that. Half exasperated, half overcome with affection, she picked up the smaller girl in a tight hug. She was light enough that Esther could swing her around a little, ruffling the feathers around the flowers, I mean. Selina squealed in delight, wiggling her feet as she flung her arms around Esther's neck. They'd grown comfortable enough over the past weeks to play and poke fun at each other, always in good-spirited fashion. And it brought no small amount of joy to Esther's heart when she made her friend laugh. By the time she set Selina down again, Esther's grim mood had mostly lifted. There were still a few tasks left to finish too, which helped distract her from the unpleasant ever-looming prospect of returning home. After they'd each pick a large basket full of flowers, she followed Selina to the cemetery, where they set about adorning all the graves. It was a solemn and yet unexpectedly pleasant task, one that always put her in a reflective mood. Perhaps it was more for the sake of the living than the dead, but it still felt as if they were doing something important. As Esther passed by the mausoleum, however, an unexpected shiver ran down her spine. She didn't know why, but something about that place. It seemed to be beckoning to her, as if the mausoleum itself could have the answers to finding the cure. Why exactly an eerie mausoleum would be beckoning to her? She had no idea. It was just her persistent curiosity, most likely, since the doors were shut and locked tight. Perhaps someday she'd get to wander inside, although the interior would probably be far more disappointing in reality. You have that key that you picked up earlier. It could be the key that would unlock the mausoleum. Come on now, just do it! Just do it! It was still late afternoon when the two girls finally returned to the manor. Since they finished their chores earlier than normal, Esther found herself with an unexpected amount of energy left over. To research, she decided to visit the study and comb through more of Isaiah's difficult writings, which required quite a bit of effort to focus on. After wishing Esther luck, Selina went off to clean the manor's low level, suggesting she came down for dinner once it grew dark. Grew dark indeed. What else of Isaiah's past are we going to learn about? Despite the relatively short time she'd spent in the study over the past few weeks, its unusual atmosphere bothered her less than before. Once you get used to something, it does bother you less through repetition. The lonely, dusty feeling hanging over the room was almost comforting in a way. Though now that she knew about Isaiah's disappearance, something about it still set her on edge. What exactly would it be on edge about his disappearance? After going through the dusty tomes for a while, Esther managed to roughly work out the next era of Isaiah's writings. Chronologically, they moved next to another shelf, full of writings on spirits and metaphysical research. I definitely think that spirits and metaphysicals are similar, but there are definitely things about them that separate them apart. He collected an impressive amount of very old books, fragile to the point that Esther feared that they might crumble in her hands. That's why you've got to be very, very careful to preserve that knowledge. After shuffling through a few uninteresting entries, she stumbled upon another one that mentioned Selina. Lifting it up to the light, she curiously began to read. What do we have here in this tome of knowledge? Despite the constant efforts of my research, I feel as if my faith in a cure is waning. The same medicine that abates most symptoms, a tincture of blood, alcohol and essence of nephrites, also creates a dangerous dependency. I doubt its suppressing effects could ever lead to permanent, satisfactory results. But it is a step in the right direction. Attempting to study the pale symptoms, either on myself or records of past victims, is a bitter struggle. Even within one person, they are painfully elusive and volatile. While some sufferers live relatively normal lives, others are so crippled by fatigue that they can barely function. Many individuals, if not most, seem to move between the two states with surprising regularity. Then, even more bafflingly, there are cases where the sickness miraculously disappears. Things like this does not just disappear, it will always strike back, which is the unfortunate reality when it comes to cancer patients. Their normal iris color returns, and the patient's lethargy vanishes. Of course, this rarely occurs overnight. In most occurrences, it takes years for such a change to happen, and of the coincidences, whatever that word is, coincides, there we go, with strange, unique events in the individual's life. All of this apparent randomness frustrates me to no end, and no prior researcher has ever been able to trace the common thread between those who are cured. Foolish as it is, I cannot help but question whether something beyond a mere biological affliction lies at the heart of this disease. I find myself returning again and again to the metaphysical, and in particular, the numerous incarnations of those unknowable entities, the Salmath, a particular strain of them, known as the Apharel by most, appear in my lecture with various fearful mentions. Such superstition strikes me as beyond foolish, but I must admit, their mystique inflames my ever insatiable curiosity. I know this line of research will inevitably end in further disappointment, but for now, at least it preoccupies my mind in place of other burdens. Like the matter of this troublesome child, of course. She was to have her mother's name originally, but I'm not so cruel as to let that curse remain with her. Thus, I have given the girl a new name, Selina. Something about the sound of it matches the blinding sparkle of her oppressively endless energy. Children are such baffling creatures, truly, and you was once one as well. I had forgotten just how innocently every life begins its journey. Innocently is a good word, because like I said earlier, when you're a child and free of adulthood corruption, it means that whichever path you take can be inherently a strong one, and through the upbringing of that child, it can lead him to either a good path or a dark path, and the environment that you grow up in is a large factor towards how you are as a person when you grow up, because it's hard to break out of a cycle when you're an adult when you are a child, because when you're a child, you're still developing. Even those who one day become the most irredeemable of corrupted souls. Okay, that's very dampening, to say the least. What do you think about all of this, Esther? Tracing her fingers lightly along the parchment's edge, Esther mulled over the meaning of what she's read. Had Isaiah really given up on a scientific cure? He seemed to share her skepticism of the supernatural, but exasperation must have driven him to it as a last resort. It disappointed her, though she could understand where he was coming from. When something had no apparent explanation, it was natural to start wondering if a god or otherworldly force hadn't played a hand, attempted to send a signal or a message through indirect means. But to attribute an entire disease to such forces... She gave a firm shake of her head. Hopefully, Isaiah had eventually left this line of research for something more practical. Otherwise, all of her searching here would only lead to another dead end. For now, though, she needs to follow his train of thought, scanning through everything in case a stray lead popped up anywhere. More research and delving we go into. Carrying a stack of books and papers over to the window's desk, Esther did her best to pore over them thoroughly. Beyond Isaiah's occasionally dry remarks on Selina's growth and education, however, the only things he'd written about were his metaphysical studies and continuously failing experiments. In a way, she could empathize with his ever-increasing despair and frustration all too well. But this was no time to give up, truly. When it finally grew too dark to read and her focus began waning alongside the sunlight, Esther remembered Selina's suggestion. It was a good thing the other girl was around to remind her to read as often. Wait, hold on. There you go, I forgot it. As she often forgot about meals during the day. That's no good whatsoever. The scroll wheel doesn't always work. We got to the fireplace. Putting away her book, she hurried downstairs where Selina had just finished cleaning the parlour. Over a meal of delicious curry! Hell yeah, curry! Curry is such a good food! Esther shared her findings with her friend, who listened intently to every word. If you don't love curry, then that's fine. But why? You can have mild curry, medium curry, spicy curries, and dragon curry. Any kind of curry, really. Oh dear. Getting passionate about food. Who listened intently to every word. After a thoughtful pause, Selina agreed with Esther's belief that her father's supernatural studies likely never led him anywhere, and yet despite her words, she seemed more hesitant than usual. Perhaps she knew something Esther didn't. If it was anything concrete, though, surely she would have shared it instead of keeping quiet. But she was unusually friendly with us at the very beginning of this tale. It's like if she had knowledge of the cycle itself, if that is definitely something that is to be of a physical material to the story. But naturally, there is nothing concrete but supernatural to begin with. Otherwise it wouldn't be supernatural, it would be normal, non-fiction. not fantasy. Non-fiction, that's a better way of describing it. Non-fictional stuff. And we've been really productive today, haven't we? Laundry, gardening, tending the graves, cleaning, researching. I'm one who did the research, you're one who did the cleaning. Isn't it nice? I always feel so lovely after a good day of work. Indeed it does. It does feel nice. I didn't have many of these days back when I lived in the city. Oh, that makes sense. If you barely have the energy to move, of course you can't do much that day, and I'm sure being stuck in bed only makes you feel worse. She seemed to understand Esther easily, and more quickly than expected. No doubt because she'd seen her father in the same state before. No, I haven't had to worry about it since I came here. Maybe it's the fresh air. She offered a casual shrug, but deep down, she felt thoroughly grateful for the reprieve. Over the course of a few weeks in the city, she would have had long periods of nearly catatonic fatigue, stretching up to 3 or 4 days at a time. However, since she arrived at the manor, Esther hadn't experienced a single one of those debilitating days. It almost seemed too good to be true. Well, whatever it is, I'm so happy that you felt better here. It's also the fresh air of the countryside. You looked a lot worse when you first arrived, but since then, you really seem different somehow. It's hard to describe. Brighter, maybe? More engaged? More bubbly? Less boring to be around. Wow! You mean more enjoyable? That is definitely not what I meant. I wouldn't be offended if you just said it. Oh, come on. You were never boring, so I'm not going to say it. I'm not going to say it whatsoever. You are a real jester now, though, apparently. Does that make you the queen? Yes. Queen of flowers, potatoes, and lentils, probably. Does most queens eat their subjects? Listen, they're quite happy to serve, and to be served on a plate, I hope. I couldn't help but put that plate one in there because the word serve keep being put in place. What do you serve for? You serve that person with undying loyalty. You serve a plate of curry. As much as Esther tried to keep a straight face, she couldn't help but snickering at Selina's retort. But Small again beamed brightly in response, evidently quite pleased that she'd been able to break Esther's deadpan expression. Well, I think this gesture could use some rest. My legs are very sore. Agreed. We both deserve a good long sleep, don't we? You didn't mention about your sore legs during researching. Yawning contentedly, Selina gave Esther a small side hug before stepping back. Her eyes sparkled with satisfied drowsiness. How do you know that we need to have social distancing within these times of hopelessness and darkness throughout the world? There is light at the end of the tunnel, and it's called the cure. Good night. I'll see you in the morning. Like always. That's what it feels like recently. We've been playing more games where we need to find a cure for something. Trash Planet is one of them. And then this. And then there's Illusion as well. Moving on. Good night, Selina. A faint smile crossed her features as she watched the small girl trot towards the stairs. I tried to read it as like a faint small smile crossed her features, but faint and small are pretty much the same thing when it comes to this sort of situation. It brought her comfort to know that they had a routine together, the first real routine she'd have since she left home. Except, of course, for her one nightly ritual. I know, it's a bad one. She doesn't want to do this, but in order to live, this needs to be done. After putting her blankets on the couch and changing clothes, Esther sat down with a silver timepiece clutched in her palm. Blood, alcohol, and essence of nephthol, as I had mentioned them in his journal. Her watch held the latter two inside its case, but by injecting the tonic directly into her veins, it allowed a small amount of ingredients to last a very long time. She had it refilled at the last city she visited, but it would last her at least a few more weeks. A few more weeks. No matter what, she would have to return home by then. Whether or not she found a cure, she couldn't stay here. That much was for certain. But someday, perhaps she could still come back. Indeed, I think Selina would like it if you came back. With that bittersweet thought lingering in her mind, Esther took her injection to daze, clicking the watch shut in her palm once it was finished. Getting to sleep, however, proved more difficult than she thought. Despite her tiredness, she kept tossing and turning on the sofa, unable to get particularly comfortable. An image kept drifting through her mind, but whenever she tried to focus and put a name to it, the thought disappeared. The Mausoleum, possibly, or the research itself, could be keeping you awake. As she struggled to cling to that elusive vision, exhaustion finally won out, pulling her down into a deep slumber. The last thing she could remember was a sudden strange question that surfaced from her subconscious. What if everything is not as it seems? That is indeed true. Indeed true indeed. I keep saying the same thing over and over again. The things that you don't see are more likely to be believable than the things that you do see at first glance. He was an idiot. A complete and utter fool. A true laughing stock of a man. What kind of insecure weakling would start questioning himself over something like this? It meant nothing. It didn't matter. He didn't really, truly care. And what is this about now, Isaiah? But as a pair of familiar footsteps rushed up the stairs, approaching his office, with pure excitement, he felt more sickeningly nervous than before any presentation he'd ever given at the academy. And that is definitely Selina. Papa! I'm here, Papa! May I come in? Yes, you may. The next moment, his door flung open. A tiny figure came running up to where he was seated by the window, bouncing her toes and clapping her hands together lightly. And this must be Selina. I want to see it, Papa. Oh, please, please, I want to see the gift you promised. Oh dear, what was the gift? Very well. Sit here quietly for a moment and cover your eyes. I will, I won't peek, I promise. Did I tell you to be quiet? Lifting her up onto his lap, he watched Selina sternly as she buried her face in her hands. Her fingers were tightly squeezed together. She seemed to be holding true to her word. With a long, quiet exhale, Isaiah slowly began to reach the window curtain. There was a small lump hidden behind the fabric, and after pausing hesitantly, he pulled it out in the open. He'd been staring at this thing so much, it barely looked like anything to him now. The project first started months ago. He'd read several books, drawn up numerous diagrams, and of course had gone through many failed attempts. His first intuitions looked like the type of monstrosities to come shambling through one's nightmares. The later ones began to improve, but he still wasn't satisfied. Like with tailoring, his perfectionism forced him to work and work until his skills were, at the very least, consistently average instead of laughably amateur. Ouch. What's wrong with being an amateur? We was all once better at the things we were striving to be a professional at for. And now, here was the peak of his unimpressive results, staring back at him with his beady eyes. And his hands began to shake slightly. She might hate it. He'd have to watch as her face fell in disappointment as she tried to put on a smile to make him happy. But that wouldn't hide how ugly she thought it was. Papa? Can I open my eyes yet? Yes, wait, no, not yet. Hold on a moment. Keep your eyes very, very tightly closed, but take your hands off your face. Like this? Yes, now hold out your hands. Okay, here they are. Going to place it in her hands. A cat! Aww. Biting his lip, he slowly pushed the small, fuzzy white present into Selina's outstretched hands. Her fingers instinctively curled it into grasp it, holding the creature aloft in the air. Can I open them now, Papa? Yes. And... Aww, that's so adorable. Their surprise expression. As Sina's eyes finally flickered open, Isaiah watched her intently for a reaction. A look of pure, speechless shock spread across her features. She didn't even blink. She just stared, wide-eyed, her mouth falling open. He was right. She hated it. She couldn't even hide how terrible she thought it was. What do you mean? She's just looking at it with such surprise and delight. He was a fool to attempt such a silly thing. It would be better to make her new clothes, or get her a new book, or craft some more tools for her kitchen. Aww. A kitty, my own kitty, and she's so pretty and so soft. I love her, Papa. I love her so much. Ah, tears overflowed onto her cheeks. She giggled delightedly in between little sobs, as if the emotion was too strong for her mind to work out how she felt. Ah, ah, that's so delightful. Well, there's no need to cry. Not if you're happy with it. I mean, she's crying with joy, man! Don't you realise that? Like, she's definitely crying with joy. What? What do you mean? I can't press enter anymore. But you made her, didn't you, Papa? You made her just for me. I put it together in a bit of spare time, yes. That's why I'm crying, silly. Because you made it just like her, for me. And now I'll always have both of you. Aww. His hands is almost as big as she is. Turning his head away slightly, Isaiah swallowed down the irksome lump forming in the back of his throat. He certainly didn't see the need to make such a fuss over it. Still, it relieved him that she recognized what the toy was supposed to be, at least. Recently, they spotted a few small forest cats around the manor. Although the little creatures never dared to come very close, Selina always gazed at them longingly, her eyes sparkling at the sight of their fluffy fur and tails. But whenever Isaiah offered to bring back a pet from the city, she always refused. It's too cruel. Animals should always be free. He tried to explain, but it would still be quite free, and probably live a better life than as a city stray. But Selina didn't seem to be having any of it. She is very stubborn in her own ways. But I do agree to some certain extent that animals should have the right to be free or not. It frustrated him, especially since it was so thoroughly obvious that she longed to hold one of these forest cats. So he'd done his best to replicate her favourite of them all, the tiny white creature that peered at them from behind the trees while they worked in the garden. It's a fluffy replica! A fluffy toy replica! With stuffing and everything. What did you use for stuffing again? Cradling the cat in her arms, Selina curled up against his chest, still sniffing. She almost never cried, which is why Isaiah felt completely at a loss for how to respond. Ah, he gave her head a few hesitant, gentle pats, but letting his palm rest atop her mane of weary hair. Oh no, not the pats, they're so endearing. The tears would stop by themselves, eventually, probably, any minute, whenever they're ready to stop. Happy birthday, Selina. Shall we go make your favourite breakfast? Yes, please. Wiping her eyes with one sleeve, she tilted her head up to nod at him with another sniffle. Very well then. And do your best not to get any berry juice on the cat. A stain like that won't come out for centuries. No, I won't get any on her. I'll keep her safe. You'll see. I know you will. You're a very smart girl after all. You wouldn't dare do such a silly thing like that. Isaiah rose to his feet, holding his small daughter in one arm without much effort. She kept the cat snuggling against her chest as he carried both of them towards the door, marching purposefully towards the kitchen. That's a lovely bonding experience there. So he hadn't disappointed her after all. For some reason, that made him feel the happiest he'd been in a long time. How funny that he should be so contented over something so trivial and mundane, so insignificant compared to his research discoveries. What a strange, soft old man he was becoming these days. But it couldn't be helped. Former days. The days which were much simpler, when times were less ecstatic. The fire danced in front of her like always, casting a warm, flickering light across the floor. Esther sipped her tea, gazed into the flames contemplatively. Okay, folks, we're going to end things off here. That was a lovely bonding experience there between Isaiah and Selina. We never really thought that Isaiah would hold a flicker of kindness in his heart with the way he was presented at the end of the game, at the start of the game, sorry, because he presented himself as some kind of horrific individual that never wanted his daughter in the first place because it reminded him too much of his former partner before she ran away. But there was still that bit of a story where she ran away while still being pregnant, so how would the daughter be able to get to the father then? Unless, of course, she visited one more time to offload the daughter and say, you know, this is yours, I don't want it, and then went off on her own ways. But thank you so much for watching, guys, and see you all in the next time of Pale Cachexia. Thank you so much for watching, take care of yourselves.